HQ's live event. My name is Henda Zurayer, and we are interviewing product leaders to hear about their product journey and experience in product management, and where you have the opportunity to join us live and ask questions. Make sure you're following Product Manager HQ's live event on LinkedIn to be updated on our current events. Today, I'm very excited to have Jeffrey Costa, who is Senior Product Manager of Web Experiences at Akamai Technologies. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Hend. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited and been looking forward to this for a couple weeks.
Thank you. We were just talking a little bit about your transition into product manager. You came from a different background. You have a bachelor's in psychology, and then you have an MBA. Can you talk about your experience about how you were led into product management?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anyone comes directly to product management as a role. In my experience, people come very obliquely into the role. There's no straight line from I'm going to college and I'm going to become a product manager. It usually is something that evolves. And that was my experience as well. The psychology degree was really me not knowing what I wanted to do and needing a degree. And I quickly found out that there's very low value in it. So I went back to school and got the MBA. And even then, technology was just starting to take off. I'm dating myself tremendously by saying this, but the Netscape era kicked off and I was mesmerized by it. And I kind of on my own began to teach myself technology in my spare time, which I think a lot of people do today, right? You can learn today and with YouTube, you can learn largely anything that you want to learn. But I found out I had an instinct for it. It was something that I enjoyed doing. And about 10 years ago, I decided to, after having a bunch of different roles, to jump to a larger company that I thought could give me a lot of advantage. And that was Akamai. Akamai is based out of Cambridge, Mass. We are a CDN, a content delivery network. We were essentially the outcome of a bunch of really smart people at MIT. So our campus is sitting catty corner to MIT today. And a lot of that is still in the blood of this company. It's a big, big engineering culture. So when I joined, what I wanted to do was marry my love of talking, as we're doing here today, with talking about the products, because Akamai is one of those technology companies you probably have never heard of unless you're in the space. But we front all the major websites that you use on a daily basis, the Walmarts, the Targets. We stream huge amounts of events. When you update your iPhone, it comes over our network. So there's so much to it. And when I joined, there wasn't any sales. This is a sales engineer role that I was looking for. And I joined knowing that role was not available immediately to me. So I jumped in and I became what we call a solution architect, a very common term used all around today. And I learned how our products worked. Essentially, after they're sold, the SA comes in and integrates them. So it was a great opportunity for me to, again, get those hands dirty, learning the technology. And after a period of time, an SE role opened up and I took that. And here I got to not only just use the technology, but go out and talk about it in front of customers on site, which was phenomenal for anyone who really enjoys that. And after a number of years of doing that, I got to these points in these conversations where customers would ask me, Jeff, I want the product to do X. And it would be so frustrating because I'm like, well, I don't know how to fix that, right? I'll take that back to product management. And then I heard enough of that where I'm like, you know what? I want to take this role and be that person who finds things that customers need to have fixed or want to have improved and do that work. So that's kind of how I back channeled my way into product management. But again, there's a lot of people who come from a lot of different disciplines so my path, I don't think is really that unique from other people. Sorry, long-winded answer to your question.
No, that's wonderful. It just seems like everyone kind of comes from different backgrounds, then learns about product management, and then wants to get into those roles. So, how have those backgrounds you mentioned, solutions architecture, sales engineer, how has that kind of like built your skills to become product manager?
Great question. Like all of them, as a product manager, you are running a business inside a business. So you have, not directly reporting to you, a bunch of different people with different backgrounds. And I feel like the different skill sets lend yourself to having those conversations. My technology background lets me talk to the engineering teams and not only understand the vocabulary that they're using, because engineering has its own language, right? But understand what I'm asking them to do as a product manager, right? The psychology helps me understand our customers, right? It's incumbent on a product manager to be able to ask really good questions of customers that get you high yield answers so that you're building the right thing. It's very easy to ask wrong questions or not understand the psychology of the questions that you're asking, get a whole bunch of false positives, and spend time and money building the wrong thing. It's anathema to product managers. And if you take that psychology element, you're understanding how to do that. The MBA helped with the finance element of it and the sales element. As a product manager, you come up with pricing models for your product, which means you're going to be in Excel spreadsheets. And if you're scared of Excel spreadsheets, you have to kind of get over that as a product manager and just do it. You also have to be involved with finance and forecasting. Hey, how many units am I going to sell? What's the price of those units? And then in addition to that, you have to have some sense of, strategy, which is also a big topic of most MBA programs. Like as a product manager, you're in control of that. Where do you want the product to go? What do you want it to be? And that's where you have to have not just the tactical day-to-day hands-on, but take 2 steps back and figure out what you want this thing to be and where you want it to go.
Let's say you don't have a background in MBA. How would you advise people to kind of build that business acumen?
That's a great question. And I don't think you need an MBA, but just to be very clear, to be a product manager, there's plenty of product managers who do not have that degree. I wanted that degree because it just gave me the broad view of the business. If you don't have that degree, what I would recommend doing what we do, we have associate product manager roles, which are more junior, that we have engineering folks apply to, we have marketing folks move over into, that you can get that experience almost like as an apprenticeship to an existing product manager. I would also recommend doing a ton of reading. Like what you guys do with HQ is amazing. Like you can learn by contact. Look at the Slack channels, understand what people are going through, read the responses and internalize them. It is an incredible resource that I wish I had. When I was starting to be a product manager, I was kind of dropped into it. But you have so many resources today to help you get started. Again, please do not, think that you need to get an MBA to do this role, but it certainly helps in terms of understanding what it means to run a business.
And then how you mentioned this a little bit in your brief current answer. How did you build your product manager skills, since at that time there was not enough resources?
Making mistakes. Like honestly, it takes you making a mistake one time and building like the wrong thing to understand that you have to build the right thing. I came into it with a very different role. Like all of my career had been very collaborative, and I wasn't the leader. And I think what I started out with was making the mistake, oh, this is just a giant collaboration among peer groups. Like here's engineering, but it actually took me a little while to figure out, no, you are a leader and you are going to have to make the hard decisions as a product manager. And it was making those decisions day in and day out that I think help you become a better product manager. And it's oftentimes some difficult stuff like, hey, if I build feature A, I don't get to build feature B. Which one's more valuable? What's going to drive more revenue to the company? Which one's going to make customers more sticky to the product? It's really getting in there and being confronted with making those decisions and realizing, and I say this a lot, If it's to be, it's up to me. As a product manager, you almost have to will things into existence that do not currently exist. And it takes a little bit of a mindset of, I want to change things. And for me, it was, you heard me say it earlier, it was, I think our products have problems. I want to change those things. And as a product manager, you're constantly doing that. If you see something that isn't working well, it's almost incumbent on you to go, I know how to make that better. Here's my proposal. And to me, it's those little day-to-day decisions that ultimately kind of gave me some of the product manager chops, as you said.
Yeah, and then what advice would you have for people to kind of develop that on their own with the not per se like product management, but like their life day-to-day skills?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think when you look at the decisions that you have to make, everything's a trade-off, right? Every single decision you make in life and inside of as your role as product manager and at home is a trade-off. If I buy this thing, I won't have money to buy this other thing. And it all comes down to utility. I also think the whole business to consumer space gives you as a customer a good idea of what a good product should be. It is hard for me to look at a website and see a defect and go, oh my gosh, they should change this. I was in an Old Navy website, put a bunch of stuff in a cart and went back to that cart like last week, and they removed something and it said like, hey, certain things in your cart are only available for a certain amount of time. And then we removed them with like a warning sign, but they didn't tell you what they removed, right? And you look at that and you're like, okay, I almost want to email or tweet out to these guys, hey, put the picture back so I know what it was that I was trying to buy. But it's things like that when you're using other people's interfaces or you're using different products, pick up on stuff like that. What doesn't work? What's broken? What could use improvement? And that's where you kind of, things that you might just get annoyed at, you kind of have to look at them through a different lens and say, if I was the product manager, I might change this thing. So I think that's one way.
Yeah. And then to add to that, you mentioned early on in your career that you had that interaction with the customer. How did you develop asking the right questions?
Fantastic question. So this is what's really hard. I stumbled across a book called The Mom Test, MOM, The Mom Test. And probably it's not hugely well known in product management circles, but I strongly recommend all of your listeners pick up this book. It's an easy read. And what it basically tells you is it teaches you how to ask good questions by this thesis. Everyone is lying to you. All of your customers are lying to you, even your mother. So if you went to your mother and said, hey, mom, I've got this idea for an iPad app that's a cookbook, your mom's going to be like, oh my gosh, Jeff, that's the greatest thing. I would totally buy that. I would use that. And yet your own mother, for a specific reason, is lying to you, not maliciously, but not to hurt your feelings, right? But to make sure that, she's your son. You want to be encouraging. But if you are asking the right questions, it might look something like this. Hey, mom, do you use the iPad in the kitchen? Hey, mom, when was the last time you bought a recipes app? Are you comfortable buying a recipes app, or is it scary? Are you worried that your iPad's going to get, flour on it, or, when you're baking, would you use it? And if you ask better questions that yield better answers, that's the way you get forward. And this book is chock full of examples of really trying to, almost like an archaeologist dusting off bones, get to the meat of what a customer really, really cares about. So strongly recommend reading that book. It's great.
Yeah, good tip. Okay, the mom test. Thank you for that. I know it's in our curriculum because it's very familiar to me. My next question are kind of on the path to building successful products. What are your strategies besides asking the right questions?
Feedback loops. You have to understand if what you're building is valuable long before you launch it. So what we try to do is we try to do mock-ups that we share with customers, sometimes live, sometimes not, that we can go get feedback on and iterate on that feedback. I've been in cycles where we didn't do that. We would go through this many month process of building something, and what comes out at the end is not what the customer wants. So you really have to take the time, as you, even if it's ugly, like we call it, like an ugly baby, show your ugly baby to the customer, and get that feedback and then record it. We always try to record these conversations, largely because it's quite literally the voice of the customer. You hear that kind of goofy phrase a lot, the voice of the customer. But when you record it and then engineering comes to you and says, well, Jeff, why are we doing this? Well, here you go. Here's a little MP3 snippet of what the customer said, or go watch this part in the video. But I think that's really important. Like, you have to be iterative in what you're doing. And if you have friendly customers that you can share this with, it goes a long way to making sure you're not building the wrong thing.
Yeah, and do you have like a select group of user customers?
We have Akamai, and still in many ways is sales led. So there are overlay sales teams that manage that interaction with the customer, and I usually go through them. And they hold and operate the relationship. So I just kind of come over the top of that and said, hey, can I ask your customer this set of questions in an email? They're like, yeah, sure. I'll give you a warm introduction. Or sometimes it's more direct than that. We operate a Slack channel where customers can interact with us. And sometimes I'll put questions out there and ask questions directly and bypass the middleman of we call them the IT, the integrated account team that overlays the customer. So there's ways you can do it directly and indirectly at Akamai, and I try to use both.
Very nice, very nice. And I saw just in your background that you won an award for leadership. So I want to talk a little bit about leadership and your advice for those who, want to follow in that path.
Interesting concept. I think leadership is something that you have to have an innate capability for. I think I took personality tests, Myers-Briggs tests that said Jeff has, leadership capabilities, but like, you actually have to do it. And leadership is interesting as a product manager because nobody reports to you. I'm not signing anyone's paycheck. I'm not signing anyone's bonus check. How do you, as a product manager, inspire people to do work on your behalf? That is through leadership. It's making sure that you care about things, that you have your ducks in a row, that you have details. Great example is, I always tell, and I tell people this is, don't bring your boss a problem, bring him a solution. And it's the same thing for product management from a leadership perspective. A great example, we have a really nice online help section that when we launched our product, I didn't like the way it was laid out. So instead of me going to our group that our docs team and saying, this sucks, right? Change this. I took the time and jumped into Balsamic Mock-Ups, a great tool for product managers. If you don't have it in your stable of tools, please get it. And I mocked up what it would look like, right? So, and I set up a meeting and I said, here's what I've heard from customers about our documentation. Here's what I'm proposing. And by the way, here's what it looks like. So what's going on there, right? Number one, I'm being proactive. I'm trying to fix something I think is broken in the world. I am not bringing a problem, but bringing a solution. And I'm helping people visualize what that solution is going to look like at the end so that we're not talking about some abstract thing. And then I am also not, I'm saying I strongly believe this, and I got some consensus from some of my peer product managers, and they agreed with it. So I took it. That to me is a good example of leadership. You're changing something and you're driving action across the organization. I had a boss one time who said, it's results, not activities, right? So it's how can you drive those results as a product manager?
I like that. Results, not activities. You demonstrate by acting and doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Along those terms, how do you collaborate with your team members?
I think it's interesting because different people have different skill sets. So the first thing I always try to do is understand the person I'm talking to. If it's finance people have a finance brain, and they're thinking about things in a certain way, and you have to tailor your conversation with them. If I'm talking to someone in marketing, They have a certain perspective on life, and you have to think through what is marketing trying to accomplish. And I find that if you can take that empathy route and put yourself in the other person's shoes when you're trying to collaborate, I think that's important. I also have learned as a product manager, you don't leave anything to chance. If you have a gut feeling that something's going wrong, or you're not quite clear on something, ask a question and clarify and get answers. And you have to have those relationships to do that. But that's kind of how I approach it, right? Everybody's a little different. Engineers have a different mindset than marketers do, and you have to kind of shift as you're talking to them to understand how they view the world.
I like that advice. It's relating back to who your audience is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about Balsamic, some of the tools. What are the tools that are in your toolbox?
Google Docs is my day-to-day go-to. Like, the comment section is unbelievable. Like, it's the way to really asynchronously collaborate with people in your team. We use that extensively. I probably review 4 Google Docs a week, and it can be anything from a design document that engineering has put together, and they'll be like, "Hey, Jeff, I want you to review this," right? Or it could be, we're updating our documentation. "Jeff, I want you to review this." Or it's marketing putting together a piece of collateral and they want to review it. So strongly recommend Google Docs. We are big Slack users here, internally and externally. Live and die on that platform. Again, Balsamic is great. Everybody has ideas, but if you can bring those ideas to life in a mock-up, you do yourself such a favor in showing what the future could be. And I think those are the primary tools we use.
And what is your advice to those who are going into product management now?
A lot of good advice. I would say product management itself is the art of knowing what to build, right? I always, that comes back to the asking good questions. I also think it's important to think 2 levels above your position and act 1 level above your position, which is to say, understand what your boss's boss is trying to accomplish, but understand also what your boss is trying to accomplish. Another thing that took me a while to figure out, again, I had a boss one time who was just full of these anecdotes. So now they're in my vocabulary and I use them all the time. And he used to say, "Jeff, surprises are for birthdays." And I loved it, because what that meant was, as a product manager, you should not be surprised by anything, right? You should know what's going on at all parts of your product lifecycle, and be able to articulate that. If someone, if you get in an elevator with someone and they say, "Hey, Jeff, what about X?" You should be able to articulate that. And I really think that that's a huge thing, is that part of it. And then the corollary to that is, he used to say, "Bad news takes the elevator, good news takes the stairs." And I laughed at that when I first heard it. I'm like, what does that mean? And what that meant was, if something goes wrong with your product, do not wait to communicate that, right? It takes the elevator, take that up immediately, so that people, again, are not surprised. But if you have good news, it can take the stairs, it can take the roundabout way up, right? And I think that's important too, because communication and making sure people are aware of what you're doing is super important, especially in a far-flung organization like ours.
Yeah, all very, very beautiful advice. And I think it's very important to understand and know. And these are things that you experience with time.
Yes, yes. Experience is the best teacher as a product manager. You're going to make mistakes and you're going to learn. And there was a time where I was being asked, "Jeff, like, are you sure this is what you want to do?" Like, it was kind of funny at first, because I didn't immediately glom onto it. But the more experience I got, the better I got at it. And it's like anything else. What's that saying? You need 10,000 hours of something before you can consider yourself an expert at it. And I think it's kind of true with this too. You need the repetition of being a product manager to learn what it's about.
Yeah. And then for web experience, and how does that differentiate from just a general product manager?
Yeah. So our Akamai as a CDN kind of speeds up and secures websites. And what I work on is our compute product, where we've layered in a layer of JavaScript compute on that above that delivery layer. So that web experience label is almost a little bit old at this point. We probably need to change that because what I focus on now is serverless computing that we offer on our network to customers. So it's a little bit different than that. But at the core, it's the same fundamental principle. Akamai is about performance, speeding up websites, speeding up functions, speeding up the work customers want to do by putting servers right next to where they are. So they kind of go together, but web experience is a little bit of a dated term at this point.
Yeah. And then we have just a couple more minutes, but any closing remarks for anyone who is going to product management or already is like 3 to 5 years in?
Yeah, it's never stop learning, I think is the biggest thing I would say. And I know it sounds pedantic, right? Like, oh, duh, of course, Jeff. But there's so much you can learn from peers that don't even work at your company today by following Slack channels and learning. And I would say that you have to be willing to have that mindset of, I want to change something in the world, right? And I think they always talk about Steve Jobs being the visionary. You don't need to be Steve Jobs, but you have to look at the world almost the way the Japanese do, and they call it Kaizen, which is, how do I make those incremental improvements that make things better in the world, and specifically in the world for your customers? That's how I like to approach the role from a larger perspective.
Very nice, very nice. And then, where do you see the future of product management?
Good question. Being a little more automated, I think there's some things that will become a little easier for product managers to get information. Like we're learning a lot about trying to sort of automate the discovery process of customers. Understanding how they're using our products, I think, is going to become and is already a big thing. I'm a big proponent of what's called product-led growth. Where you're doing a lot of instrumentation of how people are using your product as part of their onboarding. And I think that is just going to accelerate so that people really start using tools like Pendo. We're a big Pendo shop to understand how people are using your product. And then you get those feedback loops even faster than perhaps you did 5 years ago by using those kind of tool sets.
Very nice. Yeah, I think those are all the questions that I have. I don't see any questions from the viewers. If anyone would like to reach you, your LinkedIn is okay?
LinkedIn's okay. I'm at CosJeff on Twitter. So either way, either one of those are great. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about the craft. I think it's super important and super exciting. And there's a lot of openings for product managers these days, guys. So, keep your eye on that. And it's a really great career to go into because it's different every single day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I thank you for all the advice and everything that you mentioned, the mom's test for the questions and just your quotes. Oh, actually, we do have one question that just popped up.
Yep. There is a group, and their name is escaping me. I started them. I have to look up. They do a podcast for SaaS companies on product-led growth, and I don't have it at my fingertips, but I started out listening to their podcasts about how other people were doing it. Akamai is a very sales-focused company, traditionally has been. We're pivoting to be more product-led. So I started learning all of that from podcasts. And then I found out other people in my company were also interested in the same thing. So we started talking about it in almost like a tiger team or an informal team at Akamai. And there's a huge amount of articles on this that you can learn from. But it's something that I think every product manager should be aware of.
And then we have a wonderful question from Freddie Kelly.
Yes.
What do you wish you knew before becoming a product manager?
How different it would be to have multiple people that you are responsible to. In my old role as an SE, I was responsible to like my boss and a couple salespeople. As a product manager, you will be responsible to a lot more audiences than you are accustomed to talking to. Finance, engineering, legal, name it, right? Marketing, divisions of marketing. So to me, it really surprised me how I had to interact with all of these organizations that I never cared about and never interacted with. So I think if there's something I would have liked to have known, it's that, hey, Jeff, you're going to need to do this as a part of the role and understand how you're going to interact with those people. I see a few other questions in there. How do you influence a sales-led growth company to embrace product-led growth? Great question. We have been struggling with that too. There's this myth that product-led growth and sales-led growth cannot actually interact together or operate at the same time. That's a falsehood. And we have, what I recommend if you're trying to influence as a heavily sales-led growth company to PLG, you start small, right? Pick a product and then help generate what are called product-led leads. There are two concepts. There's a traditional sales-led growth where marketing gets a lead, vets the lead, it goes to a salesperson, and that can still operate. But what you should do is consider how you would create signals to show that someone is using your product and be able to act on those. Like, hey, and we're doing this right now where we're trying to instrument the behavior of customers using our product. Hey, have they created something? How long did they take to get from point A to point B? Have they reached out for help? There's all these little signals that you can jump on and start collecting to understand how far along your customers are in your product and how interested they are. So what tool did I mention with a P? So that there was Balsamic Mock-Ups, Slack, and Google Docs. All of those are free largely for common everyday use. Super useful tools as a product manager.
Perfect. Any more questions?
Cool. Well, I appreciate the airtime today. Thank you, Hind.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Have a good day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.